later. All right, Antonin, and the agenda was not yet full when I went to sleep last night. I'm checking on the Slack channel if there have been updates.
Yeah, we have a few topics, I think, there.
Okay.
Yeah, I think people agreed that talking about progress on the cloud support side was a good idea. And Rahul, who's been working on this a lot, has agreed to join the call.
Perfect.
And I think, what else did we have? What people join? Yes, Cody wanted to give an update on an update status about the upstream network policy V2 meetings.
Perfect.
So we can do that as well. And I think someone else also suggested talking about plans for OpenShift support. So I don't have a lot of background on this, but maybe
That's right.
you can.
That's right. That was looking at the Slack channel. That was Pooja suggesting it. Right. So let's. We have quite a few people on the call. We have 20 people on the call right now. Recording has started, so I guess we can start with the first topic on this agenda, and I guess that would be Rahul providing an update on Antrea Cloud support, if I'm not mistaken. Rahul, the floor is.
Hi, this is Rahul. This is my first. This is the first time I've joined this community meeting, and I'm kind of unprepared. But I'll try to go through. Genjun, if you can help me, was AKS, EKS, and GKE ever discussed in the meeting? And
I think we can assume this is the first time we talk about it from a community perspective.
Yeah, let's take everybody through the basics, Rahul.
Okay, so it was never discussed. I just wanted to know the expectation because I didn't get a chance to prepare.
Right, we never talk about any cloud support specifically, so you can go with whatever.
Okay, so I'll.
To be fair, I let Rahul know about this like 30 minutes ago, right? So it's just like an informal discussion about what we have so far and recent changes.
Okay. All right. So with respect to cloud, we started the effort with the AKS Engine. AKS Engine is an open source project from Microsoft, and which helps in deploying a K8 cluster in Azure cloud. So with that, as part of that effort, we integrated Antrea as the supported CNI, which can do both CNI chaining mode, in which Azure CNI can be changed. We can be chained with Antrea, and Antrea can enforce network policy only, and Azure will take care of the networking part. We do support the regular NCAP mode in AKS Engine 2. So we started with the regular NCAP mode in AKS Engine. And then we did a CNI chain in AKS Engine with Azure CNI. So that is just used to enforce network policy. And the advantage of doing the chaining was we wanted the networking to be taken care by the underlying cloud CNI, like Azure CNI, so that the pod actually gets IP from the VNet rather than an overlay IP. So it has advantages with respect to flow visibility and other stuff. I won't go into the details of it, but that's where we started with AKS Engine. I hope this background is good enough and I can proceed.
Yep, makes sense to me.
Okay. Okay, so then we wanted to do something similar for all other clouds. Like AKS Engine is an open source project. It's not a managed service. Azure provides something called AKS Managed Service, which is AKS, AKS Azure Kubernetes Service, sorry. And that you could use the Azure portal or Azure CLI to deploy a cluster, and the cluster would be managed by Microsoft. So it's a managed service. So with starting with 0.9 release, which is happening, I think, this week, we do support CNI chaining with Azure CNI, which means basically you deploy a cluster using Azure Managed Service, which is AKS. You'll choose Azure CNI as the networking plugin. And today they support Calico and Azure as the policy plugin in their managed service. Like AKS Engine is a different project and AKS Managed Service is a different project. AKS Engine is an open source, so we can contribute and add our CNIs in that project. But AKS Managed Service, it's managed by Microsoft Azure folks. So they just support two network policy CNI, which is Azure CNI itself and then Calico. And I guess Cody can probably share more details. We plan to add Antrea as one of the supported CNI in AKS Engine, AKS Managed Service also, which requires Microsoft support. But what we did is if you just deploy a cluster using Azure CNI and don't select any network policy, you could very well apply Antrea YAML out of band once the cluster is up and running, and Antrea will do the will enforce network policies only. It will operate in a network policy mode. So we did it like out of band. You deploy a cluster and then you apply Antrea YAML, and we would operate in a CNI chain mode, wherein Azure CNI will take care of the networking part, and then Antrea will take care of the network policy part. And once we get this endorsement from Microsoft, maybe our CNI would be listed as one of the supported CNI on their portal itself. So that's where we are with 0.9 release. We would support AKS Managed Service, which would be an which would require an out of band. You basically deploy a cluster and then apply Antrea YAML out of band. Any questions so far on the Azure cloud before I move to EKS?
Rahul,
So Rahul, somebody in the community wanted to do this today. Is it possible? Can you give them ideas on where they would go to use Antrea with AKS Engine, for example?
Sure, I can share the screen. I have the documentation too. You guys can see my screen, right?
Yes.
Okay. So master documentation. So we do support EKS, GKE, and AKS. So let me go through the AKS documentation. So there's
What are
some
you asking for AKS Engine or AKS? I think you ask for AKS Engine, right?
I started with AKS, which is Azure Cloud. So I'll just complete this flow and then we can move on EKS.
Okay.
I think Cody was asking about AKS managed
Right.
service.
Yeah. So
Yeah, I wanted to point out both actually. So go ahead, Rahul. This will work.
So this support, like this would be enabled in 0.9 release. Right now it is enabled in master branch. So basically what you do is there are some prerequisites that you install Azure CLI and then create a resource group. Create an AKS cluster and then specify just the network plugin as Azure. This will deploy AKS or Kubernetes cluster on Azure cloud, fetch the details, and then see the cluster is up and running. And then to enable Antrea in a CNI chain mode, we expect customer or user to apply this Antrea node init YAML, which basically preps up the node in such a way that the Antrea CNI can operate in a CNI chain mode. So we modify some settings on the worker node, like change Azure CNI to operate in transparent mode. Azure CNI supports like two modes, bridge mode or transparent mode. So for Antrea CNI to work with Azure CNI, it has to operate in transparent mode. So that's what this node in YAML does. It's basically a script which basically toggles the mode. And then with 0.9.0 release, once this is done, you can apply the Antrea YAML. And once it is applied, it will operate in the CNI chain mode, because Antrea AKS, in Antrea AKS YAML, we have set the traffic mode to be network policy only mode. So user doesn't have to update any parameters or config in this YAML file. And this just shows that there's a node in it, and then the Antrea agent and the controller is running on this AKS cluster. And one last thing which we need to do is once you have, so once you bring up the AKS cluster, right? There are a few pods like core DNS, dashboard, kubeproxy. They are basically, they are up and running with Azure CNI itself. And once you insert Antrea CNI, Antrea is not aware of this pod, so that and there could be some deployment also which Antrea may not be aware of. So what we recommend is once you have installed Antrea, then you should restart pods in all namespaces, be it kube system or be it any deployment on any namespaces, so that the pods can be managed by Antrea too, and Antrea can enforce the network policy. Right now, it's a manual step. We expect user to delete those pods which were already running without Antrea. Going forward, we plan to remove this step also in a way that as part of node init itself, we would restart any existing containers which are not managed by Antrea. Okay, I'll take some questions here.
So Cody, how far have we gotten with like getting an official support with Microsoft? Because if we end up with a wherein like at the initial stage itself, you can supply saying that Antrea will be the official, or Antrea will be the CNI for this cluster, then we don't need to restart these pods because Antrea should be there from the beginning.
Correct. So what we would like to see happen, and we've requested, is that Microsoft provide us a way to have a hook during the bootstrap of their cluster, so that we can ensure that our CNI is installed before these other pods get started, so we don't have to go through this whole restart process. We have a similar, maybe not exactly related, but a similar situation in EKS as well. And it's something that any type of a managed Kubernetes service provider, needs to ensure that all the components of the CNI have been installed, before we actually start the, start any pods, so that we can make sure that they get, plumbed with the right CNI, and we're aware of those pods so we can apply network policy. So that's an ongoing conversation we're having with Microsoft. Hopefully we'll get that resolved in the next week or two.
Okay. So just to show you what I was referring to, so this is the Azure cloud, and they offer this AKS Kubernetes service. Here you can create a cluster, Kubernetes cluster, using just specify the resource group, cluster name, what version of Kubernetes you want, and so on. And how many nodes do you want in your cluster? They support both Linux and Windows worker nodes. And with respect to the policy, network policy, like I was mentioning, they just support Calico and Azure. And then the eventual goal is to have Antrea as one of the supported network policy CNI. Okay. This is with respect to AKS managed service, and there's something similar which is called AKS engine. Here we can contribute, and it supports a lot of CNIs. Let me just quickly show you that too. Network policy. Okay, so here with respect to network policy, they support Calico, Cilium, and Antrea, and we added Antrea as a supported network policy CNI in this AKS engine open source project. And if you deploy a cluster, like if you're deploying a cluster, the way you deploy a cluster is you specify a JSON file in which you select your network policy plugin and network plugin like Antrea or Azure or whatever. And you just apply this JSON file on AKS deploy, and it will deploy a cluster for you in Azure cloud.
Quick question here. So you modify this page to add Antrea, or it's AKS people?
I modified.
You should put Antrea to be the first one, right? Just follow the half our ordering. We are the first.
These two were there, so I just added Antrea. I can very well move it. I didn't want to change I mean, like I would have to move it here, Antrea. So
okay,
sure, I'll take it in consideration. But yeah, so this is how you deploy it, and then as part of another update, we are planning to enable Windows support in AKS Engine 2. Rui and Ming, they're working with me, and hopefully we can get Windows support in AKS Engine.
So for AKS engine, remind me, we support letter policy only mode already, or we just support, we have to do both the policy and connectivity?
We support both the modes. We do support, if you select both the network plugin as Antrea and, network plugin and policy plugin as Antrea, then it will operate in the uncap mode. But if you just select network policy as Antrea, then we operate in a CNI mode.
I assume there will be some validation. For example, you cannot do letter policy with Antrea, but network plugin to be Calico, right?
Yeah. So that's validation takes care of it.
I see, got it.
So we do CNI chaining with just Azure CNI. And if you specify any other CNI, it's going to throw an error.
Got it.
Rahul, can you speak to if somebody wants to do a DIY or build your own Kubernetes cluster in Microsoft Azure? Can they use Antrea for that?
Sure, they can use it, yeah.
And so in that mode, would you recommend policy only or in-cap mode?
I would, okay, so if for policy only mode, if you are operating, if you are trying to do it bring your own cluster, then first the Azure CNI needs to be installed, right? And then I'm not sure if Azure CNI can be, let me.
So Cody, for your question, at least we don't support anything for the DIY cluster for letter policy only mode.
Right now, yes, we do.
But we would support, but to clarify, we would support the in-cap mode?
Yes, we support the in-cap mode. And maybe Rahul, you can confirm. I'm not sure it's low in-cap mode and probably not in low in-cap. Do you think hybrid mode can work in AKS or not? Maybe not.
No, hybrid mode cannot work in AKS because Azure is L3 cloud.
I see.
And even within the same subnet, the packets are always sent to the default gateway.
Okay.
So we can't.
Technically, maybe low in-cap can work, but we never validate, right?
Yes, so I was evaluating that option of supporting no NCAP using the CCM module, which is Cloud Controller Manager. But then I didn't complete that investigation, but it's possible to do that.
Yep.
Excellent.
It had some caveats, by the way, with respect to it. I have to go into the details of it, but there were a few caveats if we have to support it. Okay. Was there a question?
Any other questions on Azure?
Sorry, I didn't get it.
I was asking if there were any other questions on Azure. I was going to have you give them an update on Amazon next.
We can't hear you anymore, Cody, but I think he's saying if there are no more questions on Azure, we can probably move to EKS.
Move to Amazon. Absolutely. Yeah. Sorry about that. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay. So this completes the AKS Azure support, Azure Cloud support, which is via AKS Engine and AKS Managed Service. Next is EKS. EKS is AWS Cloud. We supported this we supported CNI chaining in EKS. Let me just confirm the version. I think 0.5, if I'm not wrong. Yeah.
0.5, 0.5.
Yeah, 0.5. So the for AWS Cloud, EKS is the managed service, Kubernetes managed service, and we supported the network policy only mode, wherein we do CNI chaining with AWS CNI and Antrea, and this support was added in 0.5.0 release itself. The process of doing the CNI chaining is kind of similar with what I have discussed for AKS. Cody, you want to talk about our engagement with AWS folks, or I just go into what was supported earlier and what kind of enhancement we are doing for 0.9.0 release?
Absolutely. So in AWS or Amazon, there are two different approaches that we've been pursuing. One is in EKS, and being able to have Antrea be supported in policy-only mode, where we are chained with the native ENI, CNI that Amazon provides. We also have been investigating in EKS the capability of running as a primary CNI as well, and I'll discuss why we're pursuing that in terms of the advantages it would have for a user in just a second. Additionally, we wanted to make sure that if you built your own cluster in Amazon on EC2, that we could support an NCAP mode and potentially some other modes as well. And so let's start with the managed Kubernetes or EKS in Amazon.
Hey, Cody,
using a policy only. Yep.
Hey, Cody, you're breaking up in between.
Something must be up with my internet. Let me move to a different room. Maybe it's my wireless or something. Is that any better?
Yeah.
Okay, let's try this right here. So we're going to start with the managed EKS, so policy only mode. We wanted to be able to support chaining with the native ENI, CNI, and so initial tests showed we had a race condition that's not necessarily a problem within Antrea. It's actually something that's common to probably all the CNIs that would need to chain in any situation. Basically, the issue is we, like many other CNIs, install the actual CNI binaries that kubelet calls using Kubernetes as a deployment mechanism. So basically, we have a daemon set that also deploys our agent, but can also, as part of the deployment as an init container, can deploy additional binaries that are used for the interface for CNI. If those binaries aren't present and registered correctly, you can actually, if a cluster comes up, pods can get scheduled and started, and they won't be registered with Antrea, right? Antrea won't be responsible for some of the provisioning that takes place. And so once Antrea comes up, things like network policy, for example, wouldn't be enforced until those pods are restarted and plumbed with the appropriate network interfaces that Antrea then can enforce things like network policy. And we've called this out to Amazon as, this is a potentially something that we actually, as both Amazon and the Antrea community, need to take upstream to discuss as a potential issue with the way CNI is used in Kubernetes, right? We need a way for the Kubernetes framework to, if multiple CNIs are being specified, or maybe a way to specify that multiple CNIs are being specified in terms of a chaining mode, ensure that all of the initialization has been done for all the CNIs before pods actually begin scheduling. So it's almost an update to, whether or not, nodes are ready for scheduling. In the interim, we've worked out a plan with Amazon where we can restart any pods that have been scheduled once the CNI initialization has completed, right? So that we can avoid this race condition, if you will, where a pod could have been scheduled before Antrea had a chance to initialize all of its components and be able to enforce policy. What we want to ensure is that if we're making a guarantee that policy is being enforced by Antrea, that we don't want pods having an active, network connection to the cluster, to the world, right, for any given period of time, without that protection. And so this is a mitigation right now that we put in place so that we can go ahead and begin using the CNI with Amazon, but with the plans to, fix this upstream later on. Please, the engineers that are on the call, please correct me if I, misstated any of this, or if you wanted to add some additional details to what we're doing in terms of policy only mode with EKS.
Well, I
No,
think you were correct.
Yeah, I don't know if Rahul wants to talk about the solution we have in 0.9, the daemon set we have to restart the.
That would be great. Yeah.
The pod
Sure.
automatically.
Yeah, I can talk about it. So let me go over the initial support and what enhancement we are doing in EKS. Sorry. So with 0.5.0 release, you could just apply the Antrea EKS YAML file, and we expected a user to modify few parameters in Antrea config file with respect to default MTU and the service sider. So this page is not updated. I can go back to one second. Okay, so yeah. So with the 0.5 release, we expected user to update the default MTU and service sider before applying this Antrea EKS YAML. In 0.9 release, we have removed this extra configuration in a way that the default MTU now would be auto-discovered. So once you apply Antrea, it's going to figure out the MTU of the primary NIC, and will set the default, it will adjust the default MTU accordingly. User doesn't have to modify this argument. And then the service-sider parameter is not needed with Antrea proxy. So in 0.9 release, we are enabling proxy with the network policy mode. So these two arguments are not needed. I mean, like this service-sider was kind of error-prone in a way that there were a few cases where people miss updating the service-sider, and then there were random packet drops and so on. So we thought it's better to remove this manual configuration. So we did this
to just to add some more information. I think service data is mainly needed to support upstream Kubi proxy. Just as Rahul said, in 0.9 we will switch low income mode, hybrid mode, and the policy only mode to use Antrea native proxy. And it's we no more need this service data parameter for all these modes. It also means for AKS, GKS, GKE, we no more require this parameter. Because GKE is in low income mode, I think Rahul will talk about later, and for AKS, GKS, it's policy only mode. Both will use Antrea native proxy from 0.9. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
I think, isn't it just EKS and AKS right now? I think we haven't done GKE yet.
We haven't done GKE yet.
Okay. Sorry, right. we do support GKE with low income mode, right?
Oh,
we're getting there. Yeah, we're focused right now though just on Amazon.
No, we do, but just look at the YAML and we don't enable Antrea proxy right now.
Right, so that's what I was about to say. The Antrea proxy or GK YAML is not toggled.
Really, then we should fix that. I think Sue's patch actually remove the Kubi proxy support for low income mode.
Let's take it offline. We can discuss it. Okay. So yeah, so we remove this two limitation, and then we can operate in a CNI chain mode with AWS CNI, and our Antrea CNI will operate in just the network policy only mode. There is a documentation which talks about the CNI chaining, which is the policy only mode. If you guys are interested in looking at how we did the CNI chaining and what we call the L3 mode, this is a good start. You can take a look at this documentation. Let's go back to EKS. So there were two things which we remove, and the third thing which Cody was mentioning about a race condition, in which if you have two CNIs like AWS CNI and an Antrea CNI chain together, then it may so happen that we have an existing issue in which, like, if there are some pods which are running before Antrea is deployed, then you need to manually restart it, right? Otherwise, the Antrea will not manage those ports and network policies won't be applied. So that is one issue, and we documented saying that once you install Antrea, you delete the existing pods in all namespace. But the problem is a little tricky in a way that, let's say if you're doing a scale up of your worker nodes, then it may so happen that the worker node comes up with the AWS CNI, and as soon as it comes up, a pod gets scheduled. And then when Antrea is applied after the pod was scheduled, then it may not be managed by Antrea. So this is a race condition which Cody was talking about. And here we can't expect user to monitor for scale out event and then kill pods which are running on that worker node and so on, right? So what we are doing as a temporary fix, I mean, like the proper fix can come from upstream OVS, upstream Kubernetes, but as a temporary fix for EKS, what we are doing is we are adding a node init script. Let me see. Or I'll just go to my code. So you guys can see my screen, right? And the font is clear enough, right?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So what we're doing is we are adding a node init script, which will basically wait for Antrea CNI to be present in our CNI config file. And then what it does is once the Antrea CNI is present, then we fetch the existing pods from AWS K8 agent. And so using this call, we fetch the existing pods which are running on the worker node and then kill it. Kill the container running on that worker node. So what would happen is after we kill the container, kubelet will restart. Kubelet will respawn the pod or the container, and then as the config file had both AWS CNI and then Antrea CNI, then the pods will be managed by both the CNIs. So this is what
for you. One question for you, Rahul. The CI test that we've created to test this, are they generally applicable that we could take those upstream as part of the conformance test so that we could determine if other CNIs have the same problem as part of our effort to drive this upstream for a fix? Is there any way that we can use what we know now to determine if there's problems in, say, other CNIs that run against those conformance tests?
Sure. So at least we know from Cilium that if you don't restart the existing pods, it will not be managed by Cilium. That is what we know for sure, that they also recommend restarting the existing pods. But for Calico, I have not seen any documentation wherein they talk about this problem. They don't mention that you would have to restart any pods.
Sure. What I'm suggesting is that would be the information that we have here, coupled with some of the work that we've already collaborated on the conformance test, would be a great addition, right, to help support fixing this upstream.
Yeah, sure. We can use those. Yes, we can at least for the race condition would be a little difficult for us to reproduce using conformance test, but we can mention about these problems when we do CNI chaining, we would have to restart the existing pods.
Makes sense.
Your question, Cody, is it?
So I suggest we pause for questions here on EKS in policy only mode. And if there's no questions there, the other thing that we're working on, so I'll pause here for 1 second, see if there's any questions.
Let me continue this for another 2 minutes. I just want to update about.
Sure.
We do run bi-weekly CI on AWS AKS and EKS, and the way you can fetch that information is
it's by daily.
CI.
It's by daily. Yeah.
Sorry.
It's twice a day. Yeah, not twice a week.
Twice a day. So this we have a Jenkins job in which we run conformance test on EKS, GKE, and AKS, and if you see, they're all passing. And as part of this test, we do we operate in network policy only mode, and maybe Antonio or Yang can talk about. There are a few tests which we skip. We run mostly the network policy test, and then for basic community test, there were some things which we skipped. I won't go into the details of it, but this is the page which you can refer to check on the Cloud CI. And from the supported, and we are running a EKS CI on Amazon Linux 2 OS. And for GKA, we run it on Ubuntu, and for AKS, we run it on Ubuntu 16.04. So, yeah, let's take questions now. So I think and also one another thing, if we have this conformance test, so if you want to deploy a cluster in AKS, EKS, or GKE, you can also use this standalone script, wherein if you pass in your credentials like Azure App ID, tenant, and password, it can help you deploy the cluster and set up Antrea in network policy only mode. So our Jenkins jobs indirectly calls this script, which basically deploys the cluster, applies Antrea, and runs Sonobuoy test on it. But if you are just interested in deploying a cluster and trying out Antrea on any of the clouds, if you pass in the required arguments, you should be able to deploy a cluster.
I think the only pitfall right now is that for GKE and EKS, we still sort of modify the MTU and service sider for those two, because I didn't know we can omit those in 0.9. So this probably needs some little bit modification.
Yang, as part of, yes, for EKS, we expected the default MTU and service sider, but I just like I mentioned, with 0.9 release, we will not need those configuration.
Yeah, exactly. So
Rahul is fixing the script for EKS, but we need to do GKE as well.
Okay, cool.
Rahul's PR is taking care of the EKS one.
Okay.
So Salvatore, I'm gonna do a quick time check. I think we've got 18 minutes or so left in the hour. So I know we have another couple topics. Should we continue on with the talk about the primary CNI option in AWS and also GKE and what we've done there, or should we switch to one of the other topics?
The other topics, as I remember, we had the operator, which is probably a discussion that we might also defer to the next community meeting, in my opinion. And can you remind me what the other topic was?
I was going to give a quick update, and I can defer mine to the very end on kind of what we're doing in the Network Policy V2 working group. So let's continue and try to finish out, I think, what all the good work that Rahul is talking about here on cloud, and then I'll save the last couple minutes for a quick update, and we can take any questions from there. Perfect.
Yep.
So Rahul, the other thing I was going to mention is, this concept of, we talked about a policy only mode. We could also be a primary CNI in both EKS and in you build your own cluster on EC2. And the reason you might want to do that is you may want to use IP spaces that are orthogonal to what was provided in a VPC, or in the case of AKS, what was provided in Azure Net. Talk to us a little bit about how we would go about setting that up and how it would differ with policy only mode, and maybe what some of the caveats we're running into there as well.
Jenjin, you want to take this with respect to the node IPAM and other stuff, which we would have to do to support primary CNI?
Yeah. Hello, could you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, just as Rahul said, for Antrea to be the primary CNI, we require node IPAM to be enabled for Kubernetes Controller Manager. But it's not the case in EKS, at least. I'm not sure about the EKS GKE, but it's not the case for EKS. And we have no way to enable node IPAM by our own script. And according to our discussion with Amazon folks, they don't have plan to enable node IPAM for EKS either, at least starting this year, according to them. So seems the only choice for us to do IPAM by ourselves if we want to be the primary CNI in EKS. Probably something we can consider for 0.10 or 0.11. We never discussed this, but maybe we can discuss that for only plan for 0.10, 0.11.
So basically, there's a parameter on the control plane that we have to set, right, to enable node IPAM capability in Kubernetes, and so that's not exposed currently in EKS. So therefore, we have to implement our own IPAM. Is where you're going on
Right.
that. Okay,
Right.
perfect.
So by the way, yeah, so this limitation is only for EKS, which is Amazon managed. But if you are doing like AI or bring your own cluster in, or set up your own cluster in AWS, then Antrea can be just a standalone CNI, and it can operate in both the NCAP mode and what I L2 segment.
We're losing you, Rahul. Your voice.
We're having some
breaking.
audio problems. Yeah. So,
We Zoom. Is it better now?
so what Rahul was, I had some audio problems hearing you, Rahul. I think what you were trying to say is, if you build your own cluster, right, you have control over enabling this capability in Kubernetes, right, to turn on node IPAM. And so in that case, we can be a primary CNI.
Right. And I
as
think
of
Rahul
today.
also mentioned for build your own cluster, we can also enable hybrid mode. If you configure
Right.
some ENI settings to allow multiple IPs, for example. And in theory, we can also run in low income mode. But I'm not sure if validated or not. But in theory, we should be able to do low income mode too.
And so a common setup for those who, I was just going to mention a common setup for those who may not understand what hybrid mode is for us. If I'm running my own cluster in EC2 and I decide to put, for example, nodes in different AZs, which would effectively put them in different subnets, I could run in no encap or run, without encapsulation between the nodes in the same subnet, but as traffic crosses from one node in one subnet to another node in another subnet, we would automatically encapsulate the traffic to enable that, right?
Right.
So therefore, we get, I think, more efficient. We don't have the overhead of encapsulation for every traffic path. Only those that are crossing subnets.
Yep.
Now, Jinjin, if we turn on something like hybrid mode, it does disable some of the diagnostic features, correct? Because some of the diagnostic features rely on Geneve
yes.
encapsulation. Can you talk to that a little bit?
Sure. I think you mean trace flow. For trace flow, in the current implementation up to 0.9, we require Geneve tunnels. And so if you do low encap or you do policy only mode, or if you do hybrid mode, then you will not have trace flow features. For hybrid mode, it's a little complex. If the source destinations are in the same subnet, you lose trace flow feature. If they are in different subnet, you can still do trace flow.
Thanks for clarifying that. Yeah, so that's if one other question I had on that, Jinjin, does our command line utilities and different things that might be using those tools, do they inform the user that they can't work because of that, or is that something the user just needs to know?
For CRD, I think we let me think about. I think we don't feedback anything into CRD. I think, but there will be error. There will be error in. Actually, I forgot. Probably we can double check offline. I forgot we feedback the error to CRD or not.
Great. Well, that's good. That's good information to know. If you're trying to run traceflow and you're wondering why it's not working, you might check to see what mode you're running in. So I think we've covered all the different CNI modes that we support and ways of running in Amazon. The only one we haven't gotten to is a GKE. So does someone want to talk about what we're doing with no encap and GKE?
Rahul, are you here?
Did we lose
Rahul? Yeah.
Oh, there he is.
Can you hear me?
You're breaking, I guess.
Hello.
We can. You're breaking up just a little bit.
Yeah, looks like. Is it better now?
Yes, better.
Yeah.
Okay.
You can try.
Yeah, I'll talk about the GKE part. What I was.
So before we move to GK, I have a question on EKS. You guys, I guess some of you are already aware that Amazon is working on the next generation VPC CNI, right? And I think apart from the other drawbacks that they have over the pod density and etc., the thing that is relevant to this discussion is that I think they're also trying to solve or introduce a network policy controller along with the ability to apply security groups directly on the pods with some CRDs. So what do you guys think is the strategy there for, in terms of like the collaboration and like how does it affect our road plans or roadmap?
So we're definitely looking at that. In terms of their CNI implementation. So right now, if we go as a primary CNI, we do have an advantage in terms of pod density, right? We don't have to necessarily scale hardware to match the number of ENIs that are needed for additional pods. If a user, for example, wants to run a lot of small pods, there's definitely a cost advantage of running something like Antrea as a primary CNI. We have definitely discussed the capability of including security group affiliation as something that we can enforce with network policy. It's definitely something that's on our roadmap. And so we will be addressing that. I do think that there's still going to be some additional advantages with Antrea proxy, for example, and the way that we handle VIPs, et cetera, that are going to give some performance advantages. But it's certainly something that's healthy in the ecosystem, right? We fully expect that everybody's going to be pushing, either directly from the cloud supply, the cloud providers, or from other CNIs, right, to keep pushing this envelope forward. So that's not something that we didn't expect. Rahul, do you want to go ahead and did that, first of all, did that answer your question, or were there some a specific insight you wanted to talk about on the roadmap?
No, I mean, in general, I feel like this VPC CNI that they are trying to develop is trying to cover, all of these cases. And I see a lot of people like, waiting for that. At least I'm following that issue, and I see a lot of people like following that issue and waiting for these developments to happen directly within the Amazon VPC CNI instead of them relying on Calico or Antrea for policy only mode. So I just wanted to share that with the team and see if there is.
No, that's good insight. And the other question is also going to be like how much extension from upstream Kubernetes network policy they're going to support, right? There's also a lot of work that this team is doing and this community is doing right now on extending, the capabilities with like cluster scope network policies and other things to that nature that still may be, very different than what's offered, natively by Amazon, for example, in their policy provider engine that they're working on.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. So, Jinjin, Rahul, how much effort do you guys think it will be to enable the cluster network policy CRDs and like the native Antrea network policy CRD that we are trying to implement, or we have already done that as an alpha feature in 0.9. So how much effort do you guys think that it will take for us to enable them across all the clouds, not just Amazon?
So I didn't see any issue. We enable our policy CRD, right? At least for AKS, GKS, GKE, we can easily change the YAML file to enable the feature gate for Antrea policy, and you can have Antrea native policy. If your question is for AKS engine, because in AKS engine it's a support thing, I think for that one, if we want to enable Antrea proxy policy, we need to add the option to AKS engine.
Yeah,
deployment.
for the AKS engine, I think the changes need to be done in their repository, right? So,
but we can enable, we can also enable Antrea proxy policy by default, right? And
yeah, we could. I don't know what should be the graduation criteria there, but it is certainly something that we should think about.
I guess something we can fully control on our side. If we want to enable that by default in AKS engine, we can also do.
Got it.
So time check, we've got less than 5 minutes. So do we want to go ahead and see if we can cover GKE as well? Maybe a quick overview of what we're doing there.
I can take a stab at it. Okay, just to let you know that this is where you set the traffic NCAP mode, and these are the supported modes like NCAP, no NCAP, hybrid, and policy mode. And this is present in the YAML. So this is how you can, in which mode the Antrea CNI will operate. Going back on GKE, so GKE is for the Google Cloud, and the support is pretty limited here in a way that we support it only on Ubuntu nodes. They have container optimized images also, like COS, where we don't support it. We support it only on Ubuntu. And they have a concept of VPC native enable and disable. What I mean by VPC native is if you enable this mode, then you get IP addresses for the pods from the VPC CIDR itself. Okay, and if you disable this mode, so basically we can operate in both the modes. So this is one specific concept of VPC native enable and disable. You can read about it on Google, but we can, just to let you know that we can operate in both the modes. This is the prerequisite, that this is how you set up the GKE node, and then you basically create a GKE cluster using this command. I think when we enable Antrea proxy, this documentation needs to be updated to not have this parameter mandatory. Jenjin, I'll talk to you offline. So this is basically how you create cluster on GKE. Then similar to the way we have a node in it for AKS, EKS, we also have a node in it script. The way the clusters are deployed in GKE is the kubelet parameter for the CNI actually points to kubelet. Okay, and even if you have some config file in the CNI directory, it won't be honored because the CNI is pointing to kubelet. So what we do with this node init is we modify the kubelet parameter from kubenet to CNI, so that if we add our CNI, Antrea CNI in the config file, the kubelet can honor it. So that's what we do, that this node init does. It basically updates the kubelet parameter from kubenet to CNI so that Antrea can be inserted. Support for this was added in 0.5.0, and we have a CI running, I think from 0.6, Yang can confirm, but the CI is already running on GKE. Then the next step is you download the YAML and apply it. And then this CIDR thingy, we can, once we enable Antrea proxy for GKE, we can remove this too. And then lastly, the common problem which we discussed for all chaining mode is once you have the Antrea up and running, you need to kill the existing pods or restart the existing pods so that they can be managed by Antrea. One note is we are actually not doing any CNI chaining for GKE. Okay, like for AKS, we chain it with Azure. For AKS, we chain it with AWS. For GKE, there's no chaining. What we do is we just, Antrea becomes the primary CNI, and then and we operate in no encap mode, which means there is no encapsulation required.
And in this mode, Rahul, the IP addresses, like how is IPAM working with GKE? Can you talk a little bit about that? I know we're at the very top of the hour, so we may have to make this pretty quick.
Right. So we use so the way they let's say if you're operating in a VPC disable mode, so they allocate extra cider for that VPC. What I mean by that is it is all GKE magic in a way that let's say you deploy a VPC in 10.0.0.cider, right? And once you have a VPC native mode disabled, they allocate a secondary cider called 20.0.0.0 and carve out ciders, subnets for each pod, each node, the way we do it in Antrea. So as part of the node IPAM controller, the GKE, whatever subnets they have allocated for a particular worker node, that information is passed down to the worker node through that node controller itself. Does it make sense?
Got it.
So if
it does. And yep, I just wanted to highlight that to the audience. Yep.
Yeah. So I think the Google tweaked it in such a way that if they are allocating some XYZ subnet for a particular worker node, that information is propagated down to the worker node through Kubernetes construct itself. You don't have to call any cloud APIs to figure out what is the subnet a worker node is working on. They can fetch this information from Kubernetes, like from the node spec.
Right. Excellent. Well, since we're at the top of the hour, Salvatore, I will hold and bring a update from the working group for our next session and let you know what we're working on. But if you're interested in participating, please check out SIG Network, GitHub. There's actually a link to what we're doing in the Network Policy V2 working group if you'd like to participate between now and then.
So Cody, actually, I wanted, more than an update because I also wanted to, probably we can share the user stories and the Excel sheet with the group before the next meeting. So we can get a feedback from the community, from our community as well, so that we have a fair idea of what to emphasize in the next meetings.
Yeah, makes sense. I mean, I guess you can share them on the Slack channel so we can have a look. And I guess there will be also more conformance tests coming as a part of this activity. Is that correct?
At some point, right now we're just evaluating user stories to determine what makes sense for a V2 iteration.
I see. Perfect. And it seems then that we are done for today's meeting, and we also have an agenda for the next meeting, which should be a conversation on the network policy V2 and a discussion about a potential Antrea operator, which in light of what we discussed today for public cloud becomes a little bit interesting because there is going to be some overlap, and anyway, that's something that we can discuss in 2 weeks' time. Anyway, I think that is all for today. Is there any last topic that the community would like to bring up? Going 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All right. I'm going to stop the recording right now, and I would like to thank everyone for attending this instance of the Antrea community meeting. Have a nice one, everyone, and goodbye.